Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a framework that directly challenges our modern obsession with hyper-centralized markets. We are going to explore the concept of economic decentralization, but through a very specific lens, PROUT. That's the Progressive Utilization Theory, which was formulated by the Indian philosopher Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar. It's a dynamic that I think a lot of us feel, but we rarely actually stop to analyze it. Why does wealth seem to constantly flow out of our local communities, funneling straight into a few corporate megahubs? It's kind of just a harsh reality of our modern economy, right? Local main streets struggle while distant financial centers are absolutely thriving. Well, Sarkar's vision offers a really structured blueprint that's designed to completely flip that script. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll look at the flaw of centralization. Second, what exactly is PROUT? Third, we'll break down the 4 core pillars. And finally, why this matters today. All right, let's dive into Section 1, the flaw of centralization, or as it's framed here, the global disease. If you look at the 2 dominant economic systems of the last century, you'll see a really interesting pattern. Under traditional capitalism, capital just naturally aggregates at the very top of the pyramid. Then, on the flip side, under state socialism, you get heavy bureaucratic state control. And Sarkar argued that despite their obvious, immense ideological differences, both of these systems actually share a fatal structural flaw, and that flaw is economic centralization. In both of these models, the real power and the wealth are concentrated far, far away from the everyday people who are doing the actual labor. Because of these centralized systems, wealth is quite literally drained outward. Think about it. Raw materials get stripped from rural or developing areas, they're shipped all the way across the globe for processing, and then they're sold right back to those exact same local populations as finished goods, but at a massive markup. Sarkar viewed this entire cycle as a process where local areas just become these dependent extraction zones. It leaves them completely economically fragile and highly dependent on external supply chains. I mean, we've all seen what happens when a single stuck cargo ship on the other side of the world suddenly empties out our local grocery store shelves, right? Which brings us to Section 2. What is PROUT? A structural redesign. So, PROUT stands for the Progressive Utilization Theory. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand here that Sarkar wasn't just suggesting we tinker with some tax rates or throw in a few new regulations. Not at all. PROUT is a proposal for a complete structural redesign of how economies actually function from the ground up. At its absolute core, it is entirely focused on economic decentralization. It's about taking all that power that's pulled at the very top and redistributing it all the way down to the foundation. Okay, let's move into Section 3, the 4 core pillars. This is Sarkar's blueprint. These are the 4 foundational pillars of Sarkar's decentralized economy, and they actually progress really logically. It starts with local self-reliance, moves to forming socio-economic units, then organizing through cooperative management, and it finally caps off with guaranteed purchasing power. Every single step builds on the last one to create this closed, incredibly resilient economic loop. So let's just break each of these down. Pillar 1 is local self-reliance. Essentially, PROUT dictates that communities absolutely have to harness their own local resources and labor to meet their fundamental needs first. We are talking about the absolute basics here: food, clothing, housing, education, and medical care. The hard rule is that these things must be produced and distributed locally before a community even thinks about exporting its surpluses. And why is that so important? Well, because doing this instantly shields local populations from global supply chain shocks. If a trade route completely breaks down on the other side of the planet, your town is still going to have its food, shelter, and medicine. Moving right along to Pillar 2, Sarkar introduced this concept called the master block, or the socio-economic unit. Instead of just relying on arbitrary political borders drawn on a map by some distant politician, a master block is a region that's defined by its actual economic, geographic, and cultural commonalities. So within these blocks, economic planning isn't just handed down from a distant national capital. Instead, it's built from the ground up, tailored specifically to the unique ecological and cultural realities of the people who actually live there. Now for Pillar 3, cooperative management. Here, PROUT completely sidesteps both private monopolies on one side and bureaucratic state control on the other. Instead, it heavily champions cooperatives. These are enterprises that are equitably owned and managed by the workers and the consumers themselves. And this is a real game changer, because when cooperatives distribute profits equitably among the people doing the actual work, that wealth stays locked right within the local ecosystem. It circulates locally instead of being siphoned off to pool in some offshore bank account. And that leads us directly into Pillar 4, Normally, we measure a country's economic success by GDP, right? Gross domestic product. But honestly, GDP can be highly misleading. I mean, GDP actually goes up even when a terrible natural disaster forces a city to spend millions on cleanup. So PROUT argues that true economic success shouldn't be measured by the sheer volume of capital moving around. Instead, it should be measured by the minimum guaranteed purchasing power of every single individual. The idea is that as local production satisfies basic needs, local purchasing power naturally rises, and that creates a stable, thriving internal market where everyone literally has the means to participate comfortably. Let's wrap up with Section 4, Why This Matters Today, the Modern Resonance of PROUTs. We're obviously living in an era defined by some pretty massive crises, from climate change and broken global supply chains to just soaring economic inequality. But if you look closely at how people are actually responding to this, it's fascinating. You see these modern localization movements popping up everywhere. Think about farm-to-table food systems, renewable energy microgrids, a huge surge in worker-owned cooperatives. These modern responses perfectly echo the exact principles of decentralization that Sarkar was laying out decades ago. PROUT isn't about rejecting global cooperation, not at all. It's really a highly relevant framework for figuring out how to build local resilience in a very volatile world. Sarkar captured this whole philosophy with a really powerful metaphor. He said, a healthy economy resembles a living forest, made up of diverse, thriving local ecosystems, rather than a single, fragile monoculture controlled by a few corporate giants. And that really hits the nail on the head. Economic decentralization shifts the very bedrock of the economy. It returns power, agency, and dignity to ordinary people by treating the economy not as some cold machine to be optimized for a few billionaires, but as a living, breathing ecosystem that actually has to nourish everyone living inside it. So, I'm going to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Can local cooperatives and regional self-reliance actually pave the way out of our current economic gridlock? Can we really restructure our world to keep wealth inside the communities that actually create it? It's a massive question, for sure. But frameworks like PROUT prove that alternative, highly structured blueprints do, in fact, exist. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this deep dive into economic decentralization sparked your curiosity today, and I absolutely look forward to exploring more of these concepts with you next time.